Hello there, traveler. Luck, more than anything else, determines where you find yourself in the chapters of humanity. However, how you respond determines what happens on the next page. How you, yes you traveler, respond matters, as no one else is going to fill the details of your story than yourself. Like it or not, you are your protagonist. Remember, in this story, nothing is permanent. Life, the world, yourself are in a constant state of change. Things manifest as over the continuing march of change, the causes and conditions move forward and materialize new opportunity. If a system has produced its own gravedigger, then the causes and conditions have manifest the opportunity for something better, something more equitable and sustainable, that leads to liberation and freedom for all beings. As they say, death is just the beginning. What can any one person do? In a world that profits and is built on treating you and all beings as a resource to be harvested from and extracted, what can any individual do? Well, you can do what you can. You can deconstruct, you can heal, slow down, connect with your passions and what nurtures your spark and flame. You can show up, and you can show up for yourself so that in these challenging moments when action is needed, you can respond and simply show up. Traveler, you can learn how to love in a world where we have been raised to believe everything is transactional. That to love is to be a certain way, to make certain needs. We can have the opportunity to learn how to love something, someone, yourself for who they are. Instead of giving into the easy dogmas preached through the algorithm, slow down and stop, and fall in love with here, your home. For if we live in unprecedented times, we can look back to see what rhymes while we look forward to organize something new and just as unprecedented liberation. Thank you very much, traveler, for joining us on another stop on The Descent. I am joined today by Jordan.
Hello.
How are you doing today, Jordan?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing?
Just trying to take it one stop at a time.
Absolutely.
It seems like every time we start talking here, the market's down a new couple $1 trillion. Yeah. So that's a fun new update on our timeline.
Yeah, it seems like current administration is taking a sledgehammer to not only just this country, but kind of the whole economic situation. And it's both interesting but frightening to see what's happening and how things will develop. At the end of the day, it's going to be hurting the working class the most, but I think there's definitely potential for trying to fight for a better future.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty much the bee's knees to it all, right? I think that we are, as we talk about, right, we have so many little things that are actually in our control, right? We can kind of just respond to what the bigger macro forces of life are. Mm-hmm. We're not playing some game of Civilization or Sims here where you can just go into God mode and give all the resources out or something like that and change the playing field. Things have consequences, right?
Correct.
And realistically, we're not, as someone who doesn't have God-tier abilities to just go and hack the game, we're kind of stuck in the causes and conditions of everything, right? But as we kind of were talking about here, I think that it presents the opportunity to change, right? Like when the world is going through these radical stages of change, right, it presents the opportunity for you yourself to respond to that, right? And when you look back, I think, through all the history books and everything like that, and if you actually take the time to understand the stories, people are just in their causes and conditions. They're showing up and responding to what things happened. You don't get a 1776 without a bunch of people being like, hey, no, fuck this, right? If we want to continue on the American tradition, right? So I just think that taking the opportunity to slow down and be here is one of the things that we should talk about when we're talking about what does it mean to actually organize in that next opportunity.
Correct. There was a article that I saw that the response to the article kind of gave me some optimism there. And essentially what the article was saying was that, rich people aren't going to be helping out poor people in this economic crisis, that they're not going to be coming to support lower class people or kind of bail them out. And everybody who's been in this position has kind of said, yeah, this is reality. Like, they haven't been helping us since day one. They've been only focused on their own self-interest, and they're not going to come now. And that article's not surprising at all. So I think despite things getting worse and the economic situation getting more unstable, there is still an understanding that the only way we are going to survive or get through this is by tapping into our local communities, focusing on our own economic situations, and by our own I mean our similar class structure, as opposed to hoping that a business or a wealthy philanthropist is going to bail us out. And I think that has some silver lining in that it's going to motivate people to reach out to their neighbors, to create mutual aid systems, to kind of consider one another, instead of kind of sitting back and hoping that something else will change. I think that's, again, one of the positive sides to this whole situation, is that we are starting to look towards each other, starting to find friends and neighbors that we can rely on, instead of just thinking that we can weather it by ourselves, or that the conditions will change for the better automatically.
Because things just are going to be constantly changing, right? And that's the thing, is they're not just automatically going to get better, they're just not going to automatically get worse. What dictates that is the actions that are taken, right? And that's where we get into the collective talk, where it really gets into, if we just all collectively got into the streets and stopped, we could deal with all this stuff and everything like that. Well, there's a lot of people who are really, risk adverse, right, and aren't able to deal with a lot of different things. Right. There are some people, though, in their causes and conditions who are able to, nonstop call their senator and be like, hey, actually do something more than just filibuster, and then immediately afterwards can be complicit in the next vote to get basically the pathway to destroy Medicare,
Yeah, I think that's another thing, too, with these emerging crises, is we start to understand the limitations of our community and who is not able to come out in full force, whether it is on their own volition or because of different factors. So during the pandemic, and even still today, there's a lot of immunocompromised people who physically cannot show up to places because it risks their health. And they may be turning out in different ways, or doing support in different ways, or they just might not be able to do anything because of their limitations. And that's where it's important for people to consider, how you can support those folks and how you can still be active and speak on their behalf, or give them a platform in some capacity. And so I think with this too, is as things are getting worse, we're starting to kind of realize what segments of society are most affected, which ones are going to be moving to survival mode that can't really join mass movements or organizations, and how do we incorporate those people who are kind of getting left out of the equation into a healthy and more vibrant economic society, a more well-connected and robust community too. So again, I'm hoping that everything that's happening doesn't just repeat the same thing over and over. It's not just go out to the street, march for an hour, and then go back home, but it's actually kind of considering, how do we insulate ourselves from what's going on in the peripheries, in the above us in the federal government? How do we build these grassroots communities that can withstand almost any storm, or at least kind of mitigate the effects there?
No, and I think that's just stopping where you're at, right, and understanding what can you physically do in your space, right? I think that realistically, Liberation Day, for the traveler listening, I put some good old-fashioned air quotes there, really did was give a lot of the money and capital in the U.S. the realization that it's not just going to be the continued marginalization of the normal groups, and specifically what I talk about is typically queer communities, right? Immigrant communities that have been, kind of already been targeted in the U.S. for an extended period of time now, right? When you see what they're doing with the federal health and drug administrations and everything like that, like literally just this is going to kill like queer people, right? That's just the result of what happens of these actions. And you're already seeing the damages with these, with the measles outbreaks and these vitamin A poisonings that are happening and stuff like that. Like these are like people are dying already, right? And I think you see the capital, like you said, realizing that like, so you're now seeing these group of people who haven't typically been marginalized for the first time being like, oh, fuck, and this is coming to me.
Correct.
And so we were talking about like every one of these people are going to come from different causes and conditions. So like I want to talk about one example here is like someone who's been a fucking weird doomsday prepper, right? Who has like these like new skills to be off grid and has all the different canned goods and supplies in their house and everything like that. You're someone who, if you're coming along this path and realizing these different things, like what do you actually do to actually build sustainability to get through this? Because if it just doesn't go over one night, well, that's all your bunker's not going to do any good.
Correct.
If it's a slow burn, you're kind of SOL in that situation, right?
Yeah.
So like if you're in that situation, you actually have a pretty good set of skills where you can now organize a local food bank and actually use those skills to actually help some guerrilla campaign to make sure that your closest friends are fed.
Yeah.
Quite literally, that is what we're talking about when we talk to organization. I'm not talking about you have to go show up in the streets and attend some navel-gazing protest where you go scream at a senator for a couple hours. I think that has a place and it's really important to do that. But if you're just good at prepping, man, make a local thing so you make sure all your closest family have food.
Correct. Yeah, I think a lot of people assume that prepping is going to, or like individual prepping is going to get them through the situation. But, food expires.
Yes.
It only lasts for so long. Your resources only last for so long. Even if you have a water purifier, your water source is only going to last for so long unless you're able to find another source for that. And that's where that community building is important for long-term survival and long-term growth. If you have a group of people and you are taking turns like tending the land or growing food or making food or different things like that, you can rely on each other for longer periods of time. Whereas this prepper stuff, you're kind of stuck there for a week, 2 weeks, based on whatever resources you have on there. So again, it's great if you're doing like trying to hunker down for a tornado or dealing with an earthquake situation. But we're not talking about something that will just resolve itself within 2 weeks and get back to normal. We're talking about something that's disrupting everything, every facet of life, from, how we're able to operate in the economy to the political climate to social conditions. And I think people need to understand it's not enough just to think about the next couple weeks, but thinking about the next year, the next 5 years, the next 10 years, how are our survival patterns going to hold us over till then? Are we going to get back to a new normal in 5 years? Has our normal already died and we're into a brand new normal? We can't count on the fact that things are going to automatically change. We have to assume that we have to prep and build a community for a longer term survival.
No, and I think because that's what ultimately builds sustainability, right? That's the fantasy of when it's talk about what's really prevalent in America is this Armageddon kind of doomsday cult that we have for when it comes to around prepping, right? That I'll be able to survive down in my bunker, that's really been fetishized since the advent of the nuclear bomb, right? And that whole entire duck and cover was a farce, right? If civilization collapses, you're not going to survive in that bunker. You're not going to survive disconnecting these communities off the grid. You want to make sure that your kids are okay. That's just humanity has done that by organizing together as a society.
Correct.
That's been humanity's not as as a species decision.
Correct.
That is how we deal with the world, is we organize as a society.
Yeah.
So taking your opportunity to wherever you're at, what is something that is so mundane that you can do? Let's see here. Let's say you're just a everyday a manager at a warehouse. You can make sure you're hiring trans employees.
Yep.
That's an act of resistance and doing what you can in that thing. Employing people, especially when the economic conditions are going to shit.
Correct.
If you're working in that job and your employee gets sick, you can make sure you're getting them hooked up with FMLA leave, right? The low protections there, you can have them engage in whatever systems we do agree on to support these people, right? Those are, you can just make those decisions. That doesn't require you being the vanguard of a revolution.
Yeah, I think there's small stuff that you can do in your everyday life, things like that, where you're providing a safety net for those in your workplace. Maybe you're making the conditions easier, or it's more difficult for them to get terminated from their job, so they're not at risk of being unemployed and losing access to food resources and different things like that. We're at a point where we can't rely on social safety nets from the government or from food banks or things like that because of all these defunding measures, because of disruptions in the economy. And so that's where your personal decisions and small actions are going to make a big impact. Also, another thing too is find a hobby that's also going to help you transition into that community building. So personal experience, I got into backpacking or into remote hiking. And what that's taught me is not only kind of that survival out in nature and how to take care of myself with very minimal resources, but also how to, rely on others, on, survival and taking care of one another, making sure that everybody has resources that they need, being friendly with people that you're meeting along the way, and building those relationships for, if you have to kind of retreat to a more remote area. And it could be things like, maybe you get into archery, for example, and that helps later down the road. Maybe you get into sewing or weaving or different things like that. Some sort of hobby that's going to bring you joy and happiness, but also that could be something useful for later on down the road, or that you could use to help out other people. So I think, finding something that you can do in your daily life, but also a hobby too that's going to help out others and also build a skill that's going to help out the community in the long term.
I couldn't agree more with that, right? Because we want to build a system fundamentally where it can be like, make the state pay for my stuff. Like, what's like the opportunity is here to like actually form a connection in a society where you can just show up and like live the life that you need to live, right? Like, where you are someone who, from whatever culture, whatever tradition, unfortunately, there's a lot of control in those different things. That's how different power dynamics have worked. That's why we're here in these different situations now. Being able to take those moments to heal, deconstruct, remove yourself from generational trauma, be those acts of resistance, right? Actually fulfilling the promises that we were told by our elders of making the world a better place. All those different things, right? It doesn't take you to militantly go into those situations. Sometimes it requires people to show up with force. Yeah. That when a bunch of fascists come knocking on a door, what deals with them? More people showing up and saying, no, go fuck yourself.
Correct.
But the realistic truth is most people are just going to live their everyday lives through all this still. It's going to get harder. Yeah. It's going to suffer. What do you do in those moments? Get healthy. Yeah. And then whatever individual kind of situation you can do, get the treatment you deserve, advocate for yourself in the medical systems and whatever accessible systems you have, advocate for those you love around you and your community. Make your home a better place.
Yeah.
Be
the neighbor that you want to be, or that you want to have. Make sure, say hi to your neighbor, be friendly, kind of look out for them, offer the same services that you would want them to offer you if you're in a difficult situation. Even just that small mindset shift can be instrumental in not only how you see the world, but how to get through your day or how to get through your life.
Don't be afraid to share flour. Yeah. Don't be afraid to help fix a tire. Don't be afraid to, when you see something that, a family member may be having a difficult conversation, don't run from it. Have a difficult conversation. Meet people where they're at. I think the biggest thing we need to kind of focus on in that deconstruction, right, is learning how to love and accept things for they are.
Correct.
Love isn't controlling something and being like, it has to be like this. I have to save our democracy because it has to be like this, all these different things. No, let it be.
Yeah. One of my favorite stories from, I think it was the 1930s in America. I know things are a little bit different now, but it's still something that can be used today, is a lot of the communist groups would go around town and help out those who were being evicted. So typically when people were evicted, the landlord or whomever that he would hire would take all the person's stuff and just throw it out in the street. And these communists would basically go to these piles of people's property, and they would haul it right back up the stairs, right back in the apartment, and say, no, like, this person's not going to get evicted. We're going to make sure that they're going to get back in their apartment. Something like that. It's
just the silent farmer auctions.
Yeah, the silent farmer auctions. Something where it's just like you're doing something so small but very instrumental in making sure that people don't get screwed over and that you're kind of taking care of them. Again, maybe it's just carrying something up to somebody's apartment. Maybe it's helping them move.
Groceries.
Yeah, groceries. Helping somebody move to their new home or something like that, making life easier for them. Small actions like that will slowly pile up.
No, we don't have a choice.
Correct.
You can either suffer by yourself, or you can show up and do what you can to participate in the community and what this human story is, right?
Correct.
Now, as we're closing down here, can you please do your best to express to me one little thing that you believe is actually obtainable in your current causes and condition?
I think the main thing is just kind of building your friend group.
Yeah.
Because you can't start the revolution, or you can't start these major changes unless you have a group of people going. You can have all the dialogue and everything like that, but the first thing is just create a group of people. It can just be friends that hang out after work. Maybe it's just, meeting up at a local spot. Maybe it's just holding conversation in space. I think, the foundation for everything is building that group and building that trust and conversation. It's really hard to kind of maintain work if you don't know the people that well, or if you're not super invested. So once you build that foundation, once you build a established community, it's a lot easier to build on top of that, as opposed to trying to build a community as you're also building a revolution or building changes. Have those conversations, hang out, meet people, make more friends.
Yeah.
I think that's the initial step to all this.
Thank you, Jordan. I really appreciate that. No, that was pretty kick-ass, and I think that, in honesty, man, just being human and being friends, right? I think that's a great starting point in any causes and conditions. So I think that was actually pretty goddamn good universal advice too. Jordan, thank you for joining me and the Traveler here today. Traveler, I just want to say, as always, you are loved and you are enough.